Today I got a 2015 INFINITY Q60 that I'm going to be installing that transmission in. So this is going to be kind of like a little walkthrough video, just to kind of explain the process on installing the transmission. I'm basically going to say like the bolt sizes, step by step on how to install the transmission, how to index the torque converter. So let's get to it. So I just got the transmission back from getting rebuilt. So what you want to go ahead and do is just inspect it, take a look around, make sure there's no obvious damage or anything that's going to result in you having to remove the transmission. So this looks good. Then you want to go ahead and just visually inspect the transmission, the input shaft, the stator, and also the pump seal. So just make sure there's no rough burrs or anything like that, or anything that's going to cut this O-ring and or the seal. No debris, trash, anything like that. And then what you want to go ahead and do is index the torque converter. Okay, so what we're going to go ahead and do is just inspect inside the torque converter. Make sure that there's nothing abnormal about it. You can check inside there. Some torque converters, I know like on the Hondas, they'll have an O-ring. This one in particular does not have any O-ring or anything on the torque converter itself. And also, if your torque converter is dry, you want to go ahead and put some ATF inside the torque converter itself before installation. To index the torque converter, you basically align the input shaft with the stator as well as the pump. The pump is inside the transmission, and you'll see two grooves in this particular transmission on the torque converter itself. There's 1, 2, 3. You'll hear 3 clunks. First would be the input shaft, second would be the stator, and then the pump. Once you hear that third clunk, you should still be able to turn this with a little bit of force. So once you're down and up under the car, if you remove the flex plate, you could check the rear main seal just to make sure it's still good. So go ahead and just move your harness to the side. You could also use like a little bungee cord, maybe a zip tie, just to get it up out the way. That way it doesn't get damaged when you install the transmission. So like, see this sensor, the O2 sensor, that would have got crushed. Just want to get this stuff out the way. One thing I like to do is align one of the holes through the inspection area for the torque converter. Just point it downward, that way you could get one of the converter bolts lined up once you get the transmission in. Now on this engine you'll have 8 bolts that go to the block, and I believe they are 17mm bolts. You got 2 here, 2 right there, 2 right here, and the final 2 are right here. You're also going to have a dowel right here and right here. This one is missing. I didn't see it on the transmission. So before I install it, I'm going to see if I have an extra dowel. If not, I'm just going to have to hope that one dowel is enough. And then you're also going to have 4 bolts that go to the oil sump. They go in from the back to the transmission. Then don't forget the 2 starter bolts that come in from the transmission side to the starter. So I got my 8 bolts that go on top, the 2 starter bolts, and the 4 sump bolts. I had actually lost one of the sump bolts, so if you lose one, the size is a 10mm by 1.5 thread pitch. So looks like that. It's right around the same length. Same goes for the starter, and if you lose one of the top ones, these are actually 12mm by 1.5 thread pitch. So that's good to know just in case you lose some of the hardware. Watch out for anything that may be hitting up top. If you hear anything, go ahead, stop, and take a look at the transmission. So once you get close, just double check that you don't have any wires hanging or anything that's going to get damaged, or not allow the transmission to sit flush up against the block. So this one's good. Now I'm just about ready to seat the transmission, just that it's leaning a little bit forward, so I had to adjust the transmission to sit flush up against the engine block, that way it goes in. It's also sitting kind of crooked, so I had to adjust the transmission. This is a 17mm socket, and that's what you use for these bolts. This side's a little harder to record, but one of the bolts is right there, and the second bolt hole you can see from up here, which is that one right there. So the first one, let's see if I can get it. This one right here. Second one goes right there. Now for the forefront bolts, it's kind of difficult to get anything in there, so the easiest thing I've found is a ratcheting wrench, which is a 14, so that works good. And you could also use a 1/4 inch 14mm socket. So anything bigger than these two items is going to be kind of hard to get in there, so just start off by tightening them up by hand. Third bolt is this guy right here. Little trick, if it's just swiveling, try to get one finger on the socket and use that to stop the socket from going backwards. Okay, now the one right here on the passenger side is probably the most difficult bolt to get to, just because you got your cooler lines in the way, and then you also got this plastic piece right here for the power steering harness. So this stuff kind of gets in the way, so you kind of have to work into it with your fingers. The way I did it last time, I put one finger on one side, the other finger on the other side, and basically just use two hands to walk that bolt in. Once you've done that, get your ratchet, let's see if I can get this. There we go, like so. Alright, so once you got your 8 bolts for the transmission in, and then you got your 4 bottom sump bolts, don't forget to put your 2 starter bolts on, which are 14mm. One thing you could do is support the transmission, or not the transmission, support the starter from the back, or from the front, and through the back just thread in your bolts by hand first. And after that, you could use your ratchet or your gun, you know, whatever tool you may have. There's going to be some dowels in there, so those dowels just slip in. Once you got that going, get your first bolt right there, and then your second bolt, which is, where's the hole? Can't really see. Okay, there we go. So you got your 2 bolts, and then just make sure that your starter plug, which is right here, make sure it's not pinched or anything like that in between the starter and the transmission. So 14mm, tighten those up. Good. Now what you can do is install the transmission mount and the cross member for the transmission. Right now we're actually waiting for a new transmission mount, so I'm just going to go ahead and put the cross member up just to support the transmission. That way I can remove the jack from the front. And if you're looking for the bolts, this is what they look like. It's a 14mm. See if we could focus. Look at that. 14. And if you're wondering which way the cross member goes, you can see there's a little arrow. So the arrow, you're going to point that forward like that. Go ahead and button up your power steering harness. Like so. Push this green tab in. And there we go. This thing slides into this little bracket right here. There we go. That's nice and secure. Just go ahead and install the bottom cover. Two 17mm bolts, two 14mm nuts in the front, and then two 14 nuts and two 14 nuts over here. Go ahead and install your harness. So you got this main plug right here that goes to the transmission. For the big harness, go ahead and feed it over the transmission. Like so. Not sure if you can see that, but feed it over. And then this goes in like that. Just like that. You're gonna need two 14mm bolts. One goes here. Second one goes right over here. And you got your starter plug. And for this one, I actually forgot to bolt in this bracket, so just take out the bottom bolt, feed it through the bracket, and bolt it back in. And then you got your oxygen sensor connectors. Those go on after the exhaust is back on. Now's a good time to install the banjo bolts for the cooler lines. They're 17mm. Make sure you have a washer on each end of the cooler line. I'm not going to do that right now because we're going to go with AN fittings, and we're actually switching these lines out for a cooler for the transmission. Now I'm going to go ahead and install the drive shaft, which goes back there. It's a two-piece drive shaft with the center carrier bearing that bolts into the middle right here. Alright, so next for the drive shaft, you're going to need a 14, 17, and 19mm sockets. You're probably going to need a 17 and 19mm wrench. First, start off by cleaning the drive shaft. Inspect the output shaft and the seal. Make sure it's not torn or anything. Once that's good, go ahead and slide the front of the drive shaft onto the rear of the transmission. Good. Now to get to the rear end, you have this dowel pin that sticks out the flange from the differential, and that goes in here. So don't bolt on the center yet. Stick this up there and then lift from the center to push back and line it up with the dowel. Go ahead and get the 17 mil bolts, feed them through the flange grommet, your washer in the back, and then your nut. Grab the 19 mil bolts, install those on the drive shaft side with the washer in the back. One thing I want to mention, just to make the drive shaft installation a bit easier, when you have the car in the air, just leave the transmission in neutral and you'll be able to turn the drive shaft, and then that's going to allow you to get all the bolts in. Alright, so that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video. If you guys want to see more stuff like this, make sure you subscribe to my channel. If you like the video, drop a like. Also, if you want to see some more of the projects that we got going on here at BuildWorks, subscribe and let me know in the comments down below what you guys want to see. Thanks for